Everyone in Pinewood Valley thought Elena Moreau was just the friendly restaurant owner who made the best enchiladas in Montana. They had no idea she was a former Special Forces operative who could neutralize an entire room of armed men with nothing but kitchen utensils. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Elena had always been invisible in Pinewood Valley, Montana, and that's exactly how she wanted it. The small mountain town sat nestled between snow-capped peaks and endless pine forests, where everyone knew everyone's business except hers. For 7 years, she'd run the Mountain Hearth from a converted Victorian house on Main Street, serving comfort food with hands that moved with precision nobody else could quite place. Every morning before dawn, locals caught the aroma of fresh bread and simmering sauces drifting from her kitchen windows, the kind of smells that made people think of home and safety. Elena was 38, but carried herself with the fluid grace of someone much younger. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a practical bun, and her amber eyes held a watchfulness that made people feel protected rather than scrutinized. She wore the same uniform every day: black jeans, comfortable sneakers, and a burgundy apron, over a white chef's coat that never seemed to stain, no matter how busy the kitchen got. A thin scar ran along her left forearm, barely visible beneath her rolled sleeves, like a reminder of something she'd rather forget. The Mountain Hearth wasn't just a restaurant. It was the heart of Pinewood Valley. Families celebrated birthdays in the warm dining room, decorated with local artwork and vintage photographs. Business deals were sealed over Elena's famous green chili stew. High school students worked there, first jobs bussing tables under her patient guidance. The place felt like an extension of Elena herself, welcoming, reliable, and somehow safer than anywhere else in town. But the locals had their theories about Elena Moreau. Old Frank Daniels, who occupied the corner booth every Tuesday for his coffee and apple pie, swore she'd been in the military, pointing to the way she stood perfectly straight when the national anthem played at town events. Mrs. Helen Vasquez from the post office whispered that Elena had fled an abusive marriage, explaining why she never talked about her past or received any personal mail. Sheriff Amanda Cross noticed how Elena always positioned herself with clear sight lines to all exits, and how her kitchen knives were kept sharp enough to perform surgery. What they didn't know was what Elena kept hidden in the restaurant's basement, concealed behind a false wall that looked like old storage shelving. Inside that space, which didn't appear on any building plans, was a small armory, tactical gear, encrypted communication equipment, emergency cache, and weapons that no restaurant owner should possess. Elena had spent years assembling this cache, sourcing items through channels that didn't ask questions, and maintained by habits that never died. Every Sunday after closing, when the dinner dishes were washed and the staff had gone home, Elena would descend into that hidden room. She'd check the equipment, update her security protocols, and monitor news feeds from regions most people couldn't pronounce. Her hands would rest on familiar gear like they were greeting old friends. And for just a moment, the careful mask she wore would slip. In those moments, she wasn't Elena Moreau, the restaurant owner. She was someone else entirely. The restaurant employed 6 people. Lucy Harper, a single mother who worked the evening shift and whose daughter did homework in the back booth, 2 college students who handled weekends, an elderly dishwasher named Pete, who'd been with Elena since she opened, and Marco, a line cook whose quick hands and quiet demeanor reminded Elena of soldiers she'd once known. They were more than employees. They were the closest thing to family Elena had allowed herself in 7 years. Lucy often stayed late to help with inventory, chatting about her daughter's school projects while Elena prepped vegetables for the next day. "You ever think about having kids?" Lucy had asked once, watching Elena's methodical knife work. Alana's hands had paused for just a fraction of a second. "Maybe someday," she'd replied. But both women heard the sadness beneath the words. The truth was that Elena Moreau had never existed before Pinewood Valley. The woman who created this identity had been born Elena Blackwood, and she died officially in a desert compound 7 years ago during an operation that had gone catastrophically wrong. Staff Sergeant Elena Viper Blackwood of the Army's Crimson Battalion had been erased from every database, every record, every official memory when her unit had stumbled onto something they weren't supposed to see. Elena's real past was written in classified missions across 3 continents in skills that could end lives as easily as her enchiladas could comfort souls. She'd been trained to disappear into civilian populations, to blend seamlessly into any environment, to become whatever the mission required. But this time, the mission was simply to stay alive and protect the peaceful life she'd built from the ashes of her former existence. On this particular Wednesday in October, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Not just weather, but something that would shatter the quiet life she'd built in Pinewood Valley. Elena was in the kitchen preparing for the dinner rush when she noticed the first sign. A black sedan with tinted windows parked across the street for the third day in a row. The driver had changed each time, but the surveillance was unmistakable to someone trained to recognize it. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked to the front window, adjusting the daily specials board while scanning the vehicle's occupants through her peripheral vision. Professional posture, earpieces barely visible, eyes that moved too systematically. Not local law enforcement, not federal agents conducting routine surveillance. These were private contractors, the kind who worked for organizations that preferred their operations to remain invisible. Elena's pulse quickened, but her expression remained calm as she returned to the kitchen. She'd known this day would eventually come. 7 years was a long time to stay hidden, longer than most people in her situation managed. But she'd hoped for a few more years, maybe enough time to see Lucy's daughter graduate high school, to watch the town grow and change, to pretend that Elena Moreau could have a normal life with normal problems. As the afternoon wore on, more signs appeared. A utility truck parked near the restaurant's rear exit, its crew taking an unusually long time to examine perfectly functional power lines. 2 men in hiking gear who ordered coffee, but spent more time studying the restaurant's layout than admiring the mountain views. A woman with a briefcase who claimed to be from the health department, but asked questions that had nothing to do with food safety regulations. Elena moved through her routine with practiced calm, greeting customers, checking on tables, managing the kitchen. But beneath the surface, muscle memory was awakening. Her movements became more economical. Her awareness heightened. She mentally cataloged every person in the restaurant, every possible weapon, every potential escape route. The cheerful restaurant owner was still there, but something predatory was stirring beneath the facade. As closing time approached, Elena made her decision. She dismissed the staff early, claiming a gas leak that needed professional attention. Lucy protested, worried about losing the evening's tips. But Elena pressed extra cash into her hands and insisted. "Take Emma to that movie she's been wanting to see," Elena said, forcing a smile. "My treat." After the last employee left, Elena locked the front door and turned the sign to closed. The black sedan was still there, joined now by a second vehicle. They were getting ready to move, probably waiting for the restaurant to empty completely. Elena had perhaps an hour before they made their approach, maybe less. She descended to the basement, her movements quick and silent. The hidden panel opened at her touch, revealing the equipment she'd hoped never to use again. Elena stripped off her chef's coat and apron, pulling on tactical clothing that fit like a second skin. She checked her weapons, tested communication devices, and gathered intelligence on the vehicles outside. Through her security cameras, she watched the surveillance teams consolidating their positions. 6 men, possibly more in support roles, professional movements, military-bearing equipment that suggested serious funding. This wasn't a simple extraction or interrogation. They were preparing for a fight. Elena's encrypted phone buzzed once. Message on an emergency frequency only 2 people in the world knew. She powered it up with hands that remembered similar moments in places far from Montana. The message was brief but devastating. Phoenix compromised. Apex active. Run. Marcus Chun, her former teammate, the only other survivor of Crimson Battalion's final mission. If he was telling her to run, the situation was worse than she'd imagined. Apex Defense Systems was the private military contractor that had tried to eliminate them 7 years ago. If they'd found her, they'd found Marcus, too. Elena looked around the restaurant she built, the life she'd carefully constructed, the home she'd created in this mountain town. Everything she'd worked for was about to end, but she wouldn't go. Quietly, Elena Moreau might have been a peaceful restaurant owner, but Viper had never learned how to surrender. As darkness fell over Pinewood Valley, Elena made her final preparations. The masked man would come soon, expecting to find a helpless civilian. Instead, they were about to discover that some ghosts from the past were better left undisturbed, and that the woman who made the best enchiladas in Montana could do far more dangerous things with her hands than cook. The storm was coming, and Elena Blackwood was ready to fight. The next morning arrived with deceptive normalcy. Elena opened the Mountain Hearth at 6 a.m. as she had every day for 7 years, but everything felt different now. The familiar routine of starting the coffee, preheating the ovens, and arranging fresh flowers on each table carried an edge of finality, like performing rituals for the last time. The surveillance vehicles had pulled back during the night, but Elena knew they hadn't gone far. They were repositioning, probably waiting for the right moment when the restaurant would be full of innocent civilians who could be used as leverage. She'd seen this playbook before in dusty compounds half a world away. Apex Defense Systems had always preferred psychological pressure over direct confrontation when possible. Lucy arrived for the morning shift, chatting about her daughter's upcoming science fair while she tied her apron. Elena watched her young waitress move around the dining room, setting up tables with the unconscious grace of someone who felt completely safe in her workplace. The guilt hit Elena like a physical blow. These people trusted her, had welcomed her into their community, had no idea that her presence put them all in danger. "You okay, boss?" Lucy asked, noticing Elena's distraction. "You look like you didn't sleep much." Elena forced a smile. The same mass she'd perfected over years of deep cover operations. Just worried about the new shipment of chili peppers. The supplier's been unreliable lately. It wasn't entirely a lie. Elena had been awake all night, but instead of worrying about produced deliveries, she'd been planning escape routes and contingency protocols. Every exit had been mapped, every potential weapon cataloged, every civilian evacuation scenario rehearsed in her mind. The morning rush proceeded normally. Frank Daniels occupied his usual corner booth, working through his crossword puzzle and complaining good-naturedly about the changing times. Sheriff Cross stopped by for her regular coffee in Danish, updating Elena on minor town gossip and scheduling conflicts for the upcoming Harvest Festival. A group of tourists studying hiking maps debated whether to attempt the trail to Crystal Falls before the weather turned. Elena moved through her roles seamlessly. Chef, business owner, community member. She flipped pancakes while mentally calculating the blast radius of various explosive devices. She recommended the breakfast burrito to a young couple while noting the tactical advantages of the kitchen's layout. She smiled and chatted with customers while her enhanced hearing tracked every vehicle that passed outside. Around 10 a.m., the first anomaly appeared. A man in expensive hiking gear ordered coffee and a muffin, paying cash and speaking with a slight accent Elena couldn't quite place. He chose a table with clear sightlines to both the kitchen and the front entrance, and his supposedly casual glances around the room followed patterns she recognized from surveillance training. When he left after exactly 23 minutes, Elena knew the reconnaissance phase was complete. The lunch crowd began arriving early, drawn by the aroma of Elena's famous green chili stew and fresh cornbread. The dining room filled with the usual mix of locals and tourists, their conversations creating a comfortable buzz that had always been Elena's favorite part of running the restaurant. Today, each voice felt like a potential victim she might be unable to protect. Marcus Chun's encrypted message had contained coordinates for an emergency meeting point, an abandoned fire lookout tower 20 m into the national forest. Elena knew she should run now, disappear into the wilderness before Apex's net tightened completely. But leaving meant abandoning the people who'd become her family. And Elena Moreau had never abandoned family, even if Elena Blackwood had been trained to sacrifice anything for mission success. As the afternoon wore on, subtle changes in the town's rhythm became apparent to Elena's trained senses. A telephone repair truck that spent too long outside the bank. Two women in business attire who claimed to be conducting a retail survey but asked questions about local law enforcement response times. A delivery van that circled the block 3 times before parking in the grocery store lot with a clear view of the restaurant's rear exit. Elena stepped into the walk-in cooler, ostensibly to check inventory, but actually to access the encrypted radio she'd hidden behind cases of vegetables. Marcus's voice crackled through the static, tense and urgent. "Viper, what's your status?" "Still in position," Elena replied quietly. "Multiple surveillance assets. Probable staging for dynamic entry. You compromised but mobile. Apex is gone. Active across all sectors. Phoenix Raptor and Hawk are confirmed down. We're the last two." Elena felt the familiar cold settle in her stomach. Phoenix Raptor and Hawk had been their teammates in Crimson Battalion, men she'd fought beside through dozens of classified operations. If Apex had eliminated them, the scope of this cleanup operation was larger than she'd imagined. "Extraction protocol?" she asked. "Negative. Too much heat. You need to burn your identity and run deep." Elena looked through the cooler's glass door. At Lucy refilling coffee cups. At Frank working his crossword. At the tourists planning their hiking adventure. "I've got civilians in the target zone." Static silence. Then Marcus's voice heavy with understanding. "Viper, you can't save everyone. Watch me." Elena switched off the radio and returned to the dining room. Her decision made. She moved to the register where Lucy was processing payment for a family with 2 young children and placed a gentle hand on her waitress's shoulder. "Lucy, I need you to take your break now," Elena said quietly. "Take Emma and go visit your sister and Bozeman." Today, Lucy looked confused. "But we're in the middle of lunch rush and Emma's at school." "Trust me," Elena said, meeting Lucy's eyes with an intensity that made the younger woman step back. "Call the school. Tell them it's a family emergency. Leave now and don't come back until I call you." Something in Elena's tone must have conveyed the seriousness of the situation because Lucy nodded slowly, untying her apron with suddenly shaky hands. Boss, are you in some kind of trouble? Elena's smile was sad but genuine. The kind that follows you no matter how far you run. But I won't let it touch you or Emma. As Lucy hurried out through the back entrance, Elena began the delicate process of clearing the restaurant without causing panic. She approached the family with young children first, apologizing profusely about a sudden gas leak and offering them a free meal the following week. The tourists were easier to convince, especially when Elena mentioned reports of aggressive bears in the area they'd planned to hike. Frank Daniels proved more stubborn. Been coming here for 7 years, he grumbled. Never been a gas leak before. Please, Frank, Elena said, and something in her voice made the old man look up from his crossword. For just a moment, he saw past the friendly restaurant owner to something harder underneath. All right, darling, he said quietly, gathering his things. But you call if you need anything, you hear. By 2:00 p.m., Elena had managed to clear most of the civilians from the restaurant. Only 2 tables remained. A lone businessman working on his laptop and an elderly couple celebrating their anniversary. Elena approached them with growing urgency. Her awareness of the tightening surveillance net making her skin crawl. That's when she noticed the businessman's laptop screen. Instead of spreadsheets or presentations, it displayed a tactical communication interface with her restaurant's floor plan and real-time positioning data. He looked up as she approached, and Elena saw the cold professionalism in his eyes that she recognized from 100 briefings and classified facilities. Ms. Morrow, he said quietly, closing the laptop. Or should I say Sergeant Blackwood? My name is Derek Sullivan. I represent Apex Defense Systems, and we need to have a conversation. Elena's hands remained steady as she refilled his coffee cup, but every muscle in her body coiled for action. I think you have me confused with someone else. Sullivan smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. 7 years is a long time to hide, but facial recognition technology has improved considerably since your unit's unfortunate accident in Syria. We know exactly who you are. The elderly couple at the corner table continued their quiet celebration. Completely unaware that their peaceful lunch had just become a hostage situation, Elena calculated distances, angles, potential weapons within reach. The businessman Sullivan had positioned himself perfectly to control the room while appearing completely harmless. What do you want? Elena asked. Information about Crimson Battalion's final mission. Specifically, what you and Marcus Chun discovered in that compound before it was destroyed. Our clients are very interested in recovering certain assets that went missing during the subsequent chaos. Elena remembered that night in the Syrian desert, the compound that was supposed to be empty, the files they'd found detailing weapon sales to terrorist organizations. She and Marcus had been the only survivors when Apex's cleanup team had tried to eliminate the evidence along with the witnesses. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. Sullivan's smile widened. I hoped you'd say that. It makes what happens next so much more interesting. He raised his hand slightly, and Elena caught the flash of a small transmitter around the restaurant's perimeter. She could hear the subtle sounds of vehicles moving into position. Through the front windows, she glimpsed tactical teams deploying with military precision. Elena looked at the elderly couple, still lost in their anniversary memories, and made her choice. Elena Moreau, the peaceful restaurant owner, had done everything she could to protect innocent lives. Now it was time to let Viper loose. You made one mistake, Elena said quietly, her voice taking out a harder edge. What's that? Elena's hand moved with liquid speed, grabbing the coffee pot and hurling the scalding contents at Sullivan's face, while simultaneously vaulting over the counter toward the kitchen. You should have made sure I was really retired. The final battle for Elena's carefully constructed life was about to begin. Sullivan's scream as the boiling coffee hit his face was lost in the sudden cacophony of shattering glass and splintering wood. The restaurant's front windows exploded inward as masked. Tactical operatives rappelled from the roof and crashed through every entrance simultaneously. Elena was already moving. Her 7 years of peaceful cooking, replaced in an instant by muscle memory that had kept her alive in a dozen war zones. The elderly couple at the corner table froze in terror as armed figures in black tactical gear flooded their quiet anniversary lunch. Elena's first priority was getting them to safety, but 3 operatives were already moving to block her path to the civilians. She grabbed a cast iron skillet from the stove top, spinning it with practiced precision to deflect the taser darts aimed at her center mass. Down, everyone down. The tactical team leader's voice boomed through a voice modulator, but Elena was already vaulting over the prep counter, using her intimate knowledge of the restaurant's layout to stay ahead of their coordinated advance. First operative to reach the kitchen learned why Elena had been called Viper. She moved like liquid death. the heavy skill at connecting with his tactical helmet hard enough to drop him instantly. His weapon clattered across the tile floor as Elena rolled behind the industrial stove, bullets sparking off stainless steel surfaces where she'd been standing moments before. Target is armed and highly mobile, one of the operatives reported through his __ system. Switching to non-lethal suppression. Elena almost laughed at that. Non-lethal meant they wanted her alive for interrogation, which gave her a significant tactical advantage. She grabbed a handful of kitchen knives from the magnetic strip above the prep station, testing their weight and balance. Not military grade, but she'd made do with worse. The second operative rounded the corner with his weapon raised, expecting to find a cowering restaurant owner. Instead, he found 8 in of carbon steel buried in his shoulder thrown with surgical precision to disable without killing. Elena had never been comfortable with unnecessary death, even when it came to people trying to capture her. "Where's the intel package?" Sullivan's voice cut through the chaos. His words slurred from the burns covering half his face. "Sweep every inch of this place." Elena pressed herself against the walk-in cooler, counting muzzle flashes and tracking movement patterns. 6 operatives total, plus Sullivan, who was directing from the dining room while medics worked on his injuries. Professional spacing, good communication, expensive equipment. But they were operating in her territory now in the space she'd spent 7 years learning like a battlefield. The elderly couple huddled behind their overturned table, the man shielding his wife with his body while she clutched her anniversary roses. Elena's heart clenched seeing their terror, but she forced herself to focus. Emotions were a luxury she couldn't afford with this many hostiles in play. She triggered the restaurant's fire suppression system, flooding the dining room with thick foam that reduced visibility to 0, while the strobing emergency lights created a disorienting strobe effect. In the confusion, Elena moved like a ghost through her own kitchen using service passages and maintenance spaces. She'd modified over the years with exactly this scenario in mind. The third operative never saw her coming. Elena emerged from behind the dish machine, wrapping her arm around his throat in a sleeper hold that rendered him unconscious in seconds. She appropriated his tactical radio and weapon, finally evening the odds. "Alpha Team report status." Sullivan's voice crackled to the __ system. Elena keyed the microphone, modulating her voice to match the unconscious operative's tone. "Kitchen secured. No sign of target." "Negative," came another voice. "Kitchen is not secured. Martinez is down." Elena cursed silently and tossed the radio aside. Worth a try? But these weren't amateurs. She needed a new strategy, and she needed to get those civilians out of the line of fire through the chaos of the fire suppression system. Elena made her way toward the elderly couple. The husband met her eyes as she approached, and she saw recognition there, not of her true identity, but of someone trying to help. "Service exit," she whispered, pointing toward the rear of the restaurant. "Stay low, move fast." "What about you, dear?" the woman asked, her voice shaking. Elena's smile was grim but determined. "I'll be right behind you." It was a lie, but a necessary one. Elena couldn't leave while hostile operatives occupied her restaurant. Couldn't let them tear apart the life she'd built looking for intelligence that didn't exist. The files from that Syrian compound had been destroyed years ago, but Apex defense systems clearly believed otherwise. As the couple scrambled toward the exit, Elena grabbed a commercial-grade fire extinguisher and began her counterattack. The remaining operatives were good, but they were hunting a ghost who knew every shadow, every corner, every tactical advantage the restaurant offered. The fourth operative went down when Elena triggered a hidden tripwire she'd installed near the basement entrance, sending him tumbling down the stairs into unconsciousness. The fifth found himself trapped in the walk-in cooler when Elena remotely activated the electronic lock from her hidden control panel that left 2 active hostiles plus Sullivan, who'd taken position behind the overturned tables in the dining room. Elena could hear him on his radio calling for backup and extraction support. Time was running out. She moved through the restaurant like a predator reclaiming territory, using every trick 7 years of special operations had taught her. Smoke grenades improvised from kitchen chemicals, cowrips made from broken dishware. Psychological warfare delivered through the restaurant sound system. "You can't hide forever, Sergeant Blackwood." Sullivan's voice echoed through the smoke-filled dining room. "We know about your extraction protocols, your safe houses, your emergency contacts. Marcus Chun is already in custody." The lie was obvious, but Elena felt a chill anyway. If they had captured Marcus, she truly was the last survivor of Crimson Battalion. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders like familiar armor. The sixth operative made the mistake of pursuing Elena into the basement where she'd prepared her final stronghold. Motion sensors triggered explosive charges that brought down part of the ceiling, trapping him in rubble while Elena escaped through a tunnel she'd spent 2 years carefully excavating. She emerged in the alley behind the restaurant, breathing hard but victorious. The tactical team had been neutralized. Sullivan was wounded and calling retreat, and the civilians were safe. But Elena knew this was just the beginning. Apex Defense Systems wouldn't give up after one failed operation. But as sirens wailed in the distance, someone had finally called 911. Elena looked back at her destroyed restaurant. 7 years of carefully constructed normally lay in ruins, but she'd protected what mattered most. The people of Pinewood Valley would remember Elena Moreau as the woman who'd saved them, not as the ghost who brought danger to their doorstep. Sullivan appeared in the restaurant's shattered doorway, his burned face twisted with rage. "This isn't over, Blackwood. We'll find you wherever you run." Elena stepped into the shadows of the alley, her voice carrying the cold promise of someone who'd learned warfare in the world's darkest places. "I'm not running anymore. Sullivan, you want to finish what you started in Syria? Come find me." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So, if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. As Elena disappeared into the Montana wilderness, she knew the real battle was just beginning. Apex Defense Systems had revealed their hand, but they'd also awakened something they'd spent 7 years trying to bury. Viper was back, and this time she was done hiding. The abandoned fire lookout tower stood like a skeletal finger against the Montana sky, its wooden frame weathered by decades of mountain storms. Elena reached the coordinates Marcus had provided just as the sun began to set behind the peaks, painting the wilderness in shades of blood and gold. She'd spent 6 hours moving through terrain that would challenge experienced hikers using every evasion technique she'd learned to ensure no surveillance drones or tracking teams could follow her trail. Marcus Shun emerged from the tower shadow. As Elena approached, his Asian features hardened by years of operations that officially never happened. He looked older than she remembered, silver threading through his black hair and new lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and difficult choices. But his stance was still that of a soldier, and the way he held his rifle suggested that retirement hadn't dulled his reflexes. "Took you long enough," he said, embracing her briefly. "I was starting to think Sullivan's team had gotten lucky." Elena shook her head, checking the horizon for signs of pursuit. 6 operatives, all neutralized or contained. Sullivan's wounded, but mobile. They'll regroup and come harder next time. Marcus led her up the tower's creaking stairs to the observation deck, where he'd established a temporary command post. Military-grade communication equipment hummed quietly beside camping gear and enough weapons to out a small assault team. Maps covered every surface marked with coordinates and operational notes in Marcus' precise handwriting. "How bad is it?" Elena asked, studying the tactical displays. "Worse than we thought." Marcus pulled up files on his encrypted laptop showing her surveillance photos and classified documents. Apex Defense Systems isn't just cleaning house. They're preparing to sell Crimson Battalion's operational intelligence to the highest biders: foreign governments, terrorist organizations, criminal syndicates, anyone with enough money and reason to want American Special Forces secrets. Elena felt ice form in her stomach as she scrolled through the evidence. Their old unit had operated in some of the world's most sensitive locations, conducting missions that could destabilize governments if the details became public. "The Syrian compound. They think we took something." "We did take something," Marcus replied grimly. "Remember the hard drives we pulled before the place went up? I've been analyzing the data for 7 years. It's not weapons transactions or terrorist funding like we originally thought." He opened another file displaying financial records and communication logs that made Elena's breath catch. The Syrian compound hadn't been a terrorist safe house at all. It had been a black site operated by Apex Defense Systems where they'd been conducting illegal weapons testing and human experimentation for foreign clients. They weren't selling weapons to terrorists. Elena realized they were developing them biological agents, psychological warfare techniques, enhanced interrogation methods, all funded by a consortium of nations that wanted plausible deniability for their research programs. Marcus' voice carried the weight of terrible understanding. Crimson Battalion wasn't sent to eliminate a terrorist cell. We were sent to eliminate the evidence of American contractors committing war crimes. The scope of the conspiracy hit Elena like a physical blow. Their entire unit had been sacrificed to cover up Apex's illegal operations. Their deaths arranged to look like casualties of a routine anti-terrorism mission gone wrong. Only she and Marcus had survived because they deviated from the mission, planned to investigate suspicious activity at the compound. "Who gave the order?" she asked. Marcus pulled up another file, this one containing personnel records and communication intercepts. "General Richard Thornfield, currently serving as Apex's Director of Special Operations. He was our commanding officer during the Syria mission, the one who briefed us on the terrorist threat that didn't exist. Elena studied Thornfield's photograph, remembering the stern-faced officer who'd personally selected Crimson Battalion for what he'd called a critical national security operation. She'd trusted him completely, as had the rest of her team. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. He's been hunting us for 7 years, Marcus continued. Every time one of our teammates surfaced, Apex was there within days. Phoenix tried to reach out to his family in Colorado dead in a hiking accident. Raptor attempted to contact a journalist about war crimes car accident on a lonely highway. Hulk applied for a government job requiring security clearance sudden heart attack at age 32. Elena closed her eyes seeing the faces of her fallen teammates. They'd been good soldiers, good people who'd believed they were serving their country. Instead, they'd been murdered to protect the profits of a private military contractor that had sold America's soul to foreign interests. The data from Syria, she said, do we still have it? Marcus nodded, patting an encrypted storage device on his tactical vest. Every byte. Financial records, experimental protocols, communication logs with foreign handlers, enough evidence to bring down Apex defense systems and expose the entire conspiracy. But we need to get it to someone who can act on it without being silenced. Who do we trust? Apex has connections throughout the intelligence community. Probably the Pentagon, too. I've been working on that problem for 2 years, Marcus replied, showing her a list of names on his screen. Investigative journalists, Congressional Oversight Committee members, international war crimes prosecutors, people who specialize in exposing exactly this kind of corruption. Elena studied the list, noting several names she recognized from news reports about government accountability. How do we make contact without exposing them to retaliation? Very carefully, Marcus said. But first, we need to survive long enough to make the delivery. Apex is mobilizing everything they have to stop us. Sullivan's assault on your restaurant was just the opening move. As if summoned by his words, Marcus' communication equipment began buzzing with intercepted radio chatter. Elena listened to the coded transmissions with growing alarm as the scope of Apex's response became clear. Helicopter assets moving to Grid 77 Alpha, one voice reported. Ground teams establishing perimeter at Rally Point Bravo. Thermal imaging shows 2 heat signatures at observation post. Charlie, another voice added. Request permission to engage. Marcus was already packing equipment while Elena counted muzzle flashes appearing on Rigio lines around their position. They found us faster than I expected, he muttered. Elena grabbed her gear and checked her weapons. How many? At least 20 ground operatives plus air support. They're not taking chances this time. As they prepared to abandon the tower, Elena felt the familiar rush of combat approaching. But this time was different. This time, she wasn't fighting for a mission or following orders from commanding officers who might be compromised. She was fighting for the memory of fallen friends and the chance to expose the truth that had cost so many lives. Marcus, she said as they rattled down the tower's exterior. After we get this evidence to the right people, what then? Marcus landed beside her, already moving toward the tree line as searchlights began sweeping the area. Then we make sure General Thornfield and everyone at Apex Defense Systems pays for what they did to our team. Elena smiled grimly as they disappeared into the Montana wilderness, gunfire echoing behind them. I was hoping you'd say that. The hunt was on, but for the first time in 7 years, Elena Blackwood wasn't the prey. She was the predator. And Apex Defense Systems was about to learn why. Crimson Battalion had been the military's most feared special operations unit. Elena and Marcus moved through the mountain forest like ghosts. Their 7 years of civilian life, stripped away by the familiar rhythm of tactical movement under fire. Behind them, searchlights swept the darkness while helicopters thundered overhead. But the 2 former special operators had vanished into terrain they'd studied for exactly this contingency. They reached the first cache point, a KED waterproof container buried beneath a distinctive boulder formation. As dawn began to break over the peaks, Marcus had been busy during his years in hiding, establishing supply caches and safe houses throughout the region. Inside the container were fresh weapons, communication equipment, emergency cache, and false identification documents. Remember Syria? Marcus asked as they checked their gear, his voice heavy with memory. Elena nodded, her mind traveling back 7 years to that desert compound where everything had gone wrong. October 15th, Operation Sandstorm. What we thought was our last mission before rotation home. The briefing had taken place in a sterile conference room at a classified facility outside Baghdad. General Thornfield himself had presented the intelligence, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority as he outlined their mission parameters. high-value terrorist cell operating from a compound 60 kilometers southeast of Damascus. Thornfield had explained, indicating locations on satellite photographs. Intelligence suggests they're planning coordinated attacks on American interests throughout the region. Your mission is to neutralize the threat and gather any actionable intelligence. It had seemed straightforward enough. Crimson Battalion specialized in exactly this type of operation. Fast insertion, surgical strike, clean extraction. Elena could still remember the confidence she'd felt as their helicopter approached the target zone. The trust she'd placed in the intelligence that had sent them into what she now knew was a trap. The compound was supposed to be guarded by 8 to 12 hostiles, Elena said, watching the horizon for signs of pursuit. Instead, we found 3 terrified technicians and a laboratory full of American-made equipment. Marcus pulled up the files on his encrypted tablet, showing her photographs they'd taken during that fateful mission. The images revealed a sophisticated research facility, not a terrorist safe house. Clean rooms filled with biological samples. Computer servers containing terabytes of experimental data and documentation in multiple languages detailing weapons tests on human subjects. The test subjects, Elena whispered, remembering the horror they discovered in the compound's lower levels. They weren't terrorists or enemy combatants, refugees from displaced persons camps, Marcus confirmed. Men, women, children, people who disappeared from UN facilities and ended up as experimental subjects for Apex's weapons development program. The Syrian government was providing cover in exchange for a share of the research data. Elena felt the same sick rage she'd experienced 7 years ago, standing in those underground chambers where human beings had been reduced to laboratory specimens. The official mission briefing had mentioned nothing about a research facility or human experimentation. They'd been sent to eliminate evidence, not gather intelligence. Phoenix found the communication logs first, she remembered. Phoenix had been their team's intelligence specialist, a quiet man with an encyclopedic knowledge of terrorist organizations and their operational patterns. Encrypted transmissions between Apex defense systems and foreign intelligence services. That's when we realized we weren't the rescue team, Marcus said grimly. We were the cleanup crew. The memory crystallized with painful clarity. Phoenix had been analyzing computer files when he discovered communication logs detailing Apex's illegal operations throughout the Middle East. Biological weapons testing, enhanced interrogation techniques, psychological warfare experiments, all conducted under the cover of anti-terrorism operations and funded by a consortium of nations seeking plausible deniability for their research programs. Elena remembered the moment everything had changed. She'd been documenting the laboratory equipment when Phoenix's voice had crackled through her __ system, tight, with disbelief and growing horror. Viper, you need to see this. The compound isn't terrorist-controlled. It's operated by Apex Defense Systems. We're not here to stop an attack. We're here to eliminate evidence of American war crimes. The realization had hit the entire team like a physical blow. Hawk, their demolitions expert, had been preparing charges to destroy the facility when he discovered that the building's destruction was always part of the mission plan. Raptor, their sniper, had reported unusual helicopter activity on the horizon. Not reinforcements, but another Apex team moving to eliminate witnesses. Thornfield's extraction order came 20 minutes early, Elena said, feeling the weight of that betrayal all over again. He wanted us out before we could document everything we'd found. Marcus nodded, but we didn't follow orders. Phoenix insisted on copying the computer files. You and Hawk stayed to document the human experimentation that saved our lives and doomed the rest of the team. The official after-action report had described a terrorist ambush during extraction with Crimson Battalion making a heroic last stand against overwhelming odds. The truth was far more sinister. Thornfield had ordered air strikes on the compound, while his own soldiers were still inside, planning to eliminate both the evidence and the witnesses in one surgical operation. Only Elena and Marcus had survived, thrown clear by the initial blast and managing to escape through a drainage tunnel while their teammates died in the systematic destruction of everything they discovered. For 7 years, they believed they were the only survivors. Now, they knew they'd been the only targets who'd managed to escape. The data we extracted, Elena said, studying the files on Marcus' tablet. It's all here. Names, dates, financial transactions, experimental protocols, enough evidence to expose the entire network, including proof that General Thornfield ordered the elimination of his own soldiers to protect Apex's black operations, Marcus confirmed. That's why they've been hunting us. We're not just witnesses to war crimes. We're witnesses to treason. A distant helicopter rotor beat interrupted their conversation, growing louder as it approached their position. Elena and Marcus immediately began packing their equipment, muscle memory taking over as they prepared for another tactical withdrawal. How close are they? Elena asked, shouldering her pack. Marcus checked his surveillance equipment, tracking the approaching aircraft through thermal imaging. 3 helicopters moving in coordinated search pattern. Ground teams approximately 15 minutes behind. They're boxing us in. Elena studied the terrain around their position, noting elevation changes and natural cover that could provide tactical advantages. The old mining complex on the eastern ridge. Too obvious. They'll have it covered. Marcus pointed toward a barely visible trail leading deeper into the wilderness. But there's another cache point near Crystal Lake, remote enough to avoid aerial surveillance, equipped for extended operations. As they began moving toward their next defensive position, Elena felt the familiar weight of command decisions pressing down on her shoulders. Every choice could mean the difference between exposing the truth and dying as forgotten casualties in a war that officially didn't exist. Marcus, she said as they navigated a steep rocky slope. When we get this evidence to the right people, what happens to us? Marcus paused, considering the question with the gravity it deserved. Best case scenario, congressional hearings, criminal prosecutions, maybe protective custody until the trials are over. Worst case, we disappear permanently. But our teammates get justice. Their families learn the truth, and maybe future soldiers won't have to choose between following orders and doing what's right. Elena nodded, understanding the stakes completely. They weren't just fighting for their own survival anymore. They were fighting for the memory of Phoenix Hawk Raptor and every other soldier who'd been sacrificed to protect Apex defense systems. Illegal operations. As the sound of helicopters grew closer, Elena and Marcus disappeared deeper into the Montana wilderness, carrying with them the evidence that could bring down one of the most powerful military contractors in the world. The ghosts of Syria were finally ready to speak, and their testimony would shake the foundations of the military-industrial complex that had tried so hard to silence them. The cabin at Crystal Lake sat hidden among towering pines, its weathered logs and moss-covered roof, making it nearly invisible from aerial surveillance. Marcus had purchased the property through a series of shell companies years earlier, establishing it as a final fallback position if his carefully constructed civilian identity ever collapsed. Now, as Elena and Marcus approached through morning mist rising from the lake's surface, it represented their last chance to expose the truth before Apex's net closed completely. Inside, the cabin revealed Marcus' meticulous preparation for this moment. Banks of encrypted communication equipment lined one wall connected to satellite uplinks hidden among the trees. Multiple escape routes had been mapped and supplied, complete with cached weapons and emergency provisions. Most importantly, Marcus had established secure communication channels with a network of journalists, congressional investigators, and international oversight officials who specialized in exposing government corruption. How long do we have? Elena asked, checking the perimeter security while Marcus powered up the communication systems. Apex knows our general area, but this location is off all official maps, Marcus replied, running diagnostic checks on the equipment. Maybe 12 hours before their search pattern brings them close enough to detect our electronic signatures. Elena studied the list of contacts Marcus had compiled over 2 years of careful research, names she recognized from investigative reporting on defense contractor abuses, congressional representatives known for their oversight work, international prosecutors who successfully pursued war crimes cases. Each represented a potential path to justice, but also a potential security breach if Apex had compromised their communications. Sarah Matthews at the Washington Tribune. Elena read from the screen. She's been investigating defense contractor corruption for 5 years. Multiple Pulitzer nominations for exposing black budget operations. Marcus nodded, pulling up Matthews's encrypted contact information. She's got sources throughout the Pentagon and a reputation for protecting whistleblowers. But contacting her means exposing our location to anyone monitoring her communications. What about congressional oversight? Representative Janet Morrison chairs the House Intelligence Committee. Her staff has been asking questions about missing special operations personnel for months, but Congress leaks like a sieve and Apex definitely has assets on Capitol Hill. Elena felt the familiar weight of operational planning, balancing risk against potential outcomes, while time pressure mounted with each passing hour. They needed to get their evidence to someone who could act on it, but any communication carried the risk of revealing their position to the very people trying to silence them. Multiple channels, she decided, send the evidence package to all of them simultaneously. Apex can't silence everyone at once, and if we're discovered afterward, at least the information is already in play. Marcus began preparing the data transmission, encrypting the Syria files with military-grade security protocols while establishing connections to secure servers around the world. The evidence package contained everything they'd gathered. Financial records proving Apex's illegal operations, communication logs detailing coordination with foreign intelligence services, documentation of human experimentation, and most damning of all, General Thornfield's orders to eliminate Crimson Battalion. As the first transmission began uploading, Elena monitored the security systems Marcus had installed around the cabin. Motion sensors, thermal imaging, and communication intercept. Equipment that would give them advanced warning of any approaching threats. The screens showed empty forest in all directions, but she knew that could change in seconds. First package away, Marcus reported. Sarah Matthews should receive it within the hour. Elena watched the progress bars on multiple screens as encrypted. Files moved through anonymizing networks toward their destinations. Each successful transmission increased their chances of exposing the truth, but also increased the likelihood that Apex's cyber warfare specialists would trace the signals back to their source. Elena, Marcus said quietly, studying one of his eye monitoring screens. You need to see this. The display showed intercepted communications from Apex operational channels, encrypted transmissions that Marcus equipment had managed to decode. Elena read the messages with growing alarm as the scope of Apex's response became clear. Authorization granted for terminal action. One message read, Asset elimination takes priority over intelligence recovery. Congressional inquiry initiated by Representative Morrison. Another reported recommend immediate containment protocols. Media assets activated for damage control narrative. A third transmission detailed. Prepare terrorist attack cover story for Crystal Lake incident. Elena felt ice form in her stomach as the implications became clear. Apex wasn't just hunting them anymore. They were preparing to eliminate all potential threats to their operations, including congressional investigators and journalists who might pursue the story. They're going to kill everyone, she said. Matthews Morrison, anyone who might act on our evidence. Marcus was already reaching for his weapon as alarms began, sounding from the perimeter security system, and they're going to start with us. Through the cabin's reinforced windows, Elena could see movement in the Trilene tactical teams advancing with military precision from multiple directions. But this time, the numbers were overwhelming. Dozens of operatives, helicopter support, and enough firepower to level the entire area. Marcus, how many escape routes did you prepare? 3 primary, 2 emergency fallbacks, he replied, gathering essential equipment while monitoring the approaching threat, but they've had hours to position assets. Every route might be compromised. Elena studied the tactical display, counting heat signatures and noting movement patterns. Apex had brought an entire company of operatives for this final assault, far more than necessary to capture 2 fugitives. This wasn't just an elimination mission. It was a demonstration of power, a message to anyone else who might consider exposing their operations. The transmission progress, she asked, 60% complete. Congressional package is through, but the international prosecutors and backup media contacts are still uploading. Elena made the calculation. Every special operations soldier learned to make mission success versus personal survival. The evidence was more important than their lives, but someone needed to survive to testify about what they discovered. The data alone might not be enough without witnesses who could provide context and verification. Can you route the remaining transmissions through backup systems? Already configured, Marcus confirmed. Automated upload will continue even if we're not here to monitor it. Then we run. Marcus triggered the cabin's self-destruct protocols, ensuring that any equipment left behind would be destroyed rather than captured. As they prepared to evacuate through the rear exit, Elena caught a glimpse of their pursuers through the thermal imaging system. The tactical teams advancing on their position weren't wearing standard military or law enforcement markings. These were private military contractors, mercenaries with no accountability to American law or constitutional protections. Apex had gone completely off the grid for this operation, operating outside any legal framework. Elena, Marcus said as they prepared to breach the back wall. If we don't make it out of this, I want you to know Syria wasn't your fault. None of us could have known. Elena met his eyes, seeing 7 years of guilt and survivor's remorse reflected there. Phoenix, Hawk, and Raptor died because they believed in something bigger than themselves. If we don't survive this, we make sure their sacrifice means something. Agreed. Justice for Crimson Battalion. Justice for Crimson Battalion. As explosions began rocking the cabin's front wall, Elena and Marcus disappeared into the Montana wilderness one final time, carrying with them the hope that their evidence would reach the right people before Apex could silence everyone who threatened their operations. Behind them, the automated systems continued uploading files that would expose 7 years of war crimes, treason, and murder. The final battle for truth had begun, and this time there would be no survivors unless justice prevailed. 300 miles away in Washington, D.C., Sarah Matthews sat in her cluttered office at the Washington Tribune, staring at the most extraordinary intelligence package she'd received in 20 years of investigative journalism. The encrypted files had arrived through channels so secure that only a handful of people in the world could have sent them, accompanied by authentication codes that verified their military origin. Matthews had built her career, exposing defense contractor corruption, but nothing had prepared her for the scope of what lay before her on her computer screen. Financial records showing hundreds of millions in illegal payments to foreign intelligence services. Communication logs detailing coordination between American military contractors and hostile nations. Video evidence of human experimentation conducted under the cover of anti-terrorism operations. But most damning of all were the personnel files documenting the systematic elimination of Crimson Battalion, a special operations unit that had discovered Apex Defense Systems' illegal activities. 7 years earlier, 8 soldiers marked as killed in action when in reality they'd been murdered to silence their testimony about war crimes committed by their own command structure. Jesus Christ, Matthews whispered, scrolling through photographs from the Syrian compound that showed American-made equipment being used for biological weapons testing on civilian prisoners. This isn't just contractor corruption. This is state-sponsored terrorism. Her encrypted phone buzzed with a priority message from her editor. Sarah, whatever you're working on, the Pentagon just called asking questions about your sources. Also, 3 black SUVs have been parked outside the building for the past hour. Matthews felt the familiar chill that came with pursuing stories that powerful people wanted buried, but she'd been threatened before, and the evidence on her screen was too important to suppress. She began copying files to secure servers while simultaneously contacting her network of source protection specialists. Meanwhile, Representative Janet Morrison was experiencing her own revelation in a secure conference room beneath the Capitol building. The Congresswoman had been investigating missing Defense Department personnel for months, following paper trails that seemed to lead nowhere and witness testimonies that didn't quite add up. Now, the encrypted package from Elena and Marcus provided the missing pieces of a puzzle that revealed systematic corruption at the highest levels of the military-industrial complex. General Thornfield ordered the elimination of his own soldiers. Morrison said to her chief of staff, her voice tight with disbelief, not enemy action, not operational casualties, cold-blooded murder to cover up war crimes. Her aide, a former military intelligence officer, studied the authentication codes on the files. Ma'am, these appear to be legitimate. The encryption is military-grade, and the metadata suggests they were compiled over several years by someone with intimate knowledge of special operations procedures. Morrison was already reaching for her secure phone, preparing to contact the Attorney General and the Pentagon Inspector General. But as she began dialing, alarms started sounding throughout the Capitol complex. Congresswoman, her security detail announced through the intercom, "We need to move you to a secure location immediately. Credible threat assessment indicates imminent danger to your safety." The response was faster than Elena and Marcus had anticipated. Within hours of their evidence reaching its intended recipients, Apex Defense Systems had activated assets throughout the government and media establishment to contain the damage. But they'd underestimated both the courage of the people receiving the information and the redundancy of the distribution network. Elena and Marcus had established in her secure bunker beneath the Tribune building. Sarah Matthews continued her work despite the armed security teams now protecting the newspaper offices. She'd contacted colleagues at major newspapers around the world, sharing copies of the most damning evidence while her editorial team prepared for simultaneous publication across multiple platforms. "They can't silence everyone," she told her editor over encrypted video link. "The Syrian compound evidence alone is enough to trigger international war crimes investigations. Add in the Crimson Battalion murders, and this becomes the biggest military scandal since Mile A." But Apex wasn't relying solely on intimidation. Marcus checked his equipment, scanning for electronic signatures that might be betraying their position. "Either they've got surveillance assets we haven't detected, or double quotes." He paused, studying readings that made his blood run cold. "What is it?" "Biological tracking. They're not following our electronics. They're following us." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "The Syrian compound, the human experimentation program." Marcus nodded grimly. Apex was developing biological markers that could track specific individuals across vast distances. If they tested that technology on prisoners at the compound, then they tested it on us, too. Elena finished. "Our own blood is betraying our location." The realization changed everything. Traditional evasion techniques would be useless against biological tracking systems that could identify their unique genetic signatures from miles away. They needed a different strategy, one that played to their strengths while exploiting apexes. Overconfidence, Marcus Elena said, studying the tactical situation with new understanding. They're not just hunting us to silence witnesses. They're testing their tracking technology on the two people most likely to evade capture. We're not fugitives, Marcus realized. We're test subjects, which means they want us alive, at least until they validated their systems. Elena began planning their next move with the cold calculation that had made her one of the military's most effective special operators. That gives us one advantage they don't expect. What's that? Test subjects sometimes refuse to cooperate. As night fell over the Montana wilderness, Elena and Marcus prepared for a different kind of battle. Instead of running from their pursuers, they would turn the hunt around using Apex's own tracking systems against them. While the evidence they'd transmitted continued, spreading through networks of journalists and investigators around the world. Not in Washington. Sarah Matthews published the first articles about Apex Defense Systems' illegal operations, sending shockwaves through the political establishment. Representative Morrison called for emergency congressional hearings, while international prosecutors began preliminary investigations into war crimes committed by American contractors. But the real battle was being fought in the Montana mountains, where two former special operations soldiers had become the last witnesses to a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of the American military establishment. Elena and Marcus were no longer running from the truth. They were fighting to ensure it survived long enough to bring down the people who'd betrayed everything they'd sworn to protect. The network was awakening, and Apex Defense Systems was about to learn that some secrets were too big to bury, no matter how many people they were willing to kill to protect them. Elena studied the tactical display on Marcus' tablet, watching the heat signatures of their pursuers move through the forest with mechanical precision. The Apex teams were following their biological tracking signals with such confidence that they'd abandoned basic field craft, creating patterns that revealed everything Elena needed to know about their technology and capabilities. They're using a distributed sensor network, she observed, noting how the search teams coordinated their movements, probably satellite-based with ground relay stations to triangulate our exact positions. Marcus highlighted several locations on the map where unusual electromagnetic signatures suggested hidden surveillance equipment. If we can disable enough relay stations, we might be able to create blind spots in their tracking system. Better than that, Elena said, her mind working through tactical possibilities that had made Crimson Battalion legendary among special operations units. We can use their own network against them. While Elena and Marcus planned their counterattack, the evidence they'd transmitted was creating chaos throughout Washington's power structures. Sarah Matthews had published her expose on the Washington Tribune's front page, accompanied by classified documents that proved Apex Defense Systems had been conducting illegal weapons testing on human subjects in Syrian facilities. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, every major news network was covering the story. Congressional leaders were demanding investigations, and international human rights organizations were calling for war crimes prosecutions. But Apex Defense Systems had spent years preparing for exactly this scenario. General Richard Thornfield appeared at a hastily arranged Pentagon press conference, his uniform displaying the decorations of a distinguished military career that had been built on lies and murder. He faced the cameras with the calm authority of someone accustomed to controlling narratives through sheer force of institutional credibility. The allegations being circulated by certain media outlets are based on fabricated documents created by domestic terrorists seeking to undermine American national security. Thornfield announced the individuals responsible for these false claims are Elena Blackwood and Marcus Chun, former military personnel who have been wanted by federal authorities for 7 years in connection with the theft of classified materials and the murder of their fellow soldiers. The lies were delivered with such conviction that Elena, watching the broadcast through Marcus' encrypted satellite connection, felt a moment of doubt about her own memories. Thornfield was rewriting history in real time, using his position and reputation to cast the victims as perpetrators, but Sarah Matthews had prepared for this response. Her follow-up articles included video evidence from the Syrian compound, financial records showing Apex's payments to foreign intelligence services, and most damning of all, communications intercepts, proving that Thornfield had ordered the elimination of Crimson Battalion to cover up war crimes. Representative Morrison was even more direct in her response, calling an emergency session of the House Intelligence Committee and demanding that the Attorney General issue arrest warrants for Thornfield and other Apex executives. We have documented evidence of American military contractors conducting human experimentation, selling classified intelligence to foreign powers, and murdering U.S. soldiers to cover their crimes. She announced, "This is not a matter of national security. This is a matter of justice." In the Montana wilderness, Elena and Marcus moved to implement their plan. They'd identified 3 ground relay stations within striking distance of their position, disguised as routine forestry service installations, but actually serving as tracking nodes for Apex's biological surveillance network. "First target," Elena said, studying the compound through binoculars. 2 guards, standard security protocols, probably expecting us to avoid any installation with active personnel. Marcus nodded, checking his weapons and communication gear. Simultaneous strikes on all 3 stations. Coordinate the attacks to look like equipment failures rather than sabotage. They separated to approach their targets using the same infiltration techniques that had made them legends in Crimson Battalion's covert operations. Elena moved through the forest like a shadow, closing on her objective with the patient precision of a natural predator. The relay station was hidden within what appeared to be a routine weather monitoring facility. But Elena's trained eye caught the subtle differences that marked it as a military installation. Enhanced antenna arrays, hardened communication equipment, and security measures far beyond what would be necessary for meteorological research. She disabled the guards using non-lethal methods, sedative injections that would leave them unconscious, but alive, honoring the principles that had always separated legitimate soldiers from the murderers they were fighting. Elena had never been comfortable with unnecessary killing, even when it came to people trying to capture her. Inside the facility, she found confirmation of everything Marcus had suspected. Advanced biological tracking equipment that could identify specific individuals from traced genetic material left on surfaces they'd touched hours earlier. Satellite communication arrays capable of coordinating surveillance across entire continents. And most disturbing of all, evidence that this technology was being tested on dozens of other targets around the world. Elena planted Marcus' specialized explosive charges throughout the facility, designed to create electromagnetic pulses that would permanently disable the tracking equipment while appearing to be caused by natural system failures. As she prepared to evacuate, her communication earpiece crackled with Marcus' voice. "Station 2 neutralized. Equipment destroyed. Guard secured. Moving to extraction point. Station 3 clear." Came another voice. Not Marcus, but someone Elena didn't recognize. Both targets eliminated. Tracking systems offline. Elena felt ice form in her stomach as she realized what had happened. Apex had been monitoring their communications probably since their first contact at the fire lookout tower. The relay stations they'd been attacking weren't just tracking nodes. They were bait designed to draw Elena and Marcus into a carefully orchestrated trap. Marcus abort and evade. She transmitted communications compromised. Repeat. Communications compromised. Static answered her, followed by the sound of automatic weapons fire in the distance. Elena's training took over as she moved toward the gunfire. Knowing she was probably walking into an ambush, but unable to abandon her teammate, she found Marcus pinned down behind a fallen tree, surrounded by Apex operatives who'd been waiting for exactly this scenario. But they'd made one critical error in their planning. They'd assumed Elena would approach from the most direct route, not realizing that Crimson Battalion had trained its personnel to expect and exploit exactly this kind of tactical overconfidence. Elena circled wide through terrain that should have been impossible to navigate silently using skills that had been honed in a dozen similar situations across 3 continents. The Apex team never saw her coming until she was already among them. Moving with lethal efficiency that reminded everyone present why Viper had been considered one of the military's most dangerous operators. Within minutes, the engagement was over. 3 Apex operatives unconscious, their weapons secured, and Marcus free to continue their mission. But Elena knew this was just the beginning. Apex had revealed their hand, showing that they were willing to use military force against American citizens on U.S. soil. "They're not just covering up war crimes anymore," Elena said as they regrouped. "They're committing new ones." Marcus nodded, checking his equipment for damage. "Which means the evidence we transmitted is working. They're desperate enough to abandon all pretense of legal authority." As they prepared to evacuate the area, Elena's satellite phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Sarah Matthews. "Congressional hearing scheduled. International prosecutors mobilizing. Need you alive to testify. Help is coming." For the first time in 7 years, Elena felt hope beginning to outweigh fear. The network they'd activated was proving stronger than Apex's ability to contain it. And the truth was spreading faster than lies could be manufactured to counter it. But the final confrontation was still ahead. And Elena knew that General Thornfield would never allow them to testify about what they'd discovered in Syria. The hunt was about to become a war. And this time, the entire world would be watching. The emergency session of the House Intelligence Committee convened at 6 a.m., with Representative Morrison presiding over what would become one of the most explosive congressional hearings in decades. The evidence Elena and Marcus had transmitted filled secure servers with documentation of systematic war crimes. But without live witnesses to provide testimony, Apex Defense Systems' legal team was already mounting a formidable defense. The documents in question are sophisticated forgeries, testified Apex's chief counsel, a former attorney general whose reputation for integrity had been carefully cultivated over decades. Our forensic analysis suggests they were created using artificial intelligence systems to mimic authentic military communications. No credible evidence supports these outrageous allegations against General Thornfield or Apex Defense Systems. But Sarah Matthews had spent the night preparing her own presentation, working with cryptographic experts and former intelligence officials to authenticate every piece of evidence. When she took the witness stand, she carried documentation that would shatter Apex's narrative of innocence. Congresswoman Morrison, members of the committee, Matthews began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. The evidence before you today represents 7 years of meticulous documentation by 2 American soldiers who discovered their own command structure was conducting illegal weapons testing on human subjects. She activated the committee room's classified display system, showing video footage from the Syrian compound that had been enhanced and verified by multiple independent sources. The images of American-made equipment being used for biological experimentation on civilian prisoners created stunned silence in the normally contentious hearing room. This footage was recorded by Staff Sergeant Elena Blackwood and Sergeant Marcus Chun during what they believed was a routine counterterrorism operation in October 2017. Matthews continued, what they actually discovered was a black site facility operated by Apex Defense Systems where American military contractors were developing biological weapons for foreign intelligence services. The committee members leaned forward as Matthews presented financial records showing millions of dollars in payments from hostile nations to Apex accounts, communication logs detailing the sale of classified intelligence, and most damning of all, General Thornfield's written orders authorizing the elimination of Crimson Battalion. These soldiers didn't steal classified materials, Matthews concluded. They risked their lives to expose war crimes being committed in America's name. And they've been hunted ever since by the very people who should have been protecting them. Meanwhile, in the Montana wilderness, Elena and Marcus were preparing for what they both knew would be their final stand. The destruction of the biological tracking stations had temporarily blinded Apex's surveillance network, but it had also triggered a massive escalation in their pursuit efforts. Satellite imagery shows at least 60 operatives converging on our position. Marcus reported studying intelligence intercepts on his encrypted tablet. Helicopter gunships, armored vehicles, enough firepower to level a small town. Elena checked her weapons and equipment, noting their severely limited ammunition and the overwhelming odds they faced. But she'd been in impossible situations before, and Crimson Battalion had never been defeated by superior numbers alone. They're not just trying to capture us anymore, she observed, studying the tactical deployments approaching their position. This is a termination mission. They'd rather see us dead than risk our testimony reaching Congress. Marcus nodded grimly. Thornfield knows the evidence is authentic. The only way to discredit it now is to eliminate the witnesses and claim we were terrorist sympathizers who died resisting capture. As they prepared their defensive positions in a rocky canyon that offered limited cover but excellent fields of fire, Elena's satellite phone buzzed with an urgent message from Representative Morrison's office. Federal marshals en route to provide protection and escort to congressional hearing maintain position. Help arriving within 2 hours. Elena showed the message to Marcus, who responded with a bitter laugh. 2 hours. We need to hold off a company of private military contractors. With enough ammunition for maybe 20 minutes of sustained fighting. Then we make every shot count, Elena replied, her voice carrying the calm determination that had made her legendary among special operations personnel. Crimson Battalion doesn't surrender, and we don't abandon the mission. They took positions among the canyon's rocky outcroppings using natural cover and improvised fortifications to create defensive strong points that would force Apex's forces to advance through carefully prepared kill zones. Elena had spent years studying battlefield tactics from history's greatest military minds, and she intended to use every lesson against the people who'd betrayed their oaths and murdered their teammates. The first wave of attackers approached the canyon with the overconfidence of mercenaries who'd never faced opponents of Elena and Marcus caliber. They advanced in textbook formations, relying on superior numbers and firepower to overwhelm resistance through pure attrition. Elena's first shot dropped the lead operative at 800 m, a precision rifle shot that announced to the entire assault force that they were facing something far more dangerous than ordinary fugitives. Marcus followed with a series of shots that eliminated the team's heavy weapons specialists, forcing them to take cover and reassess their tactical approach. "This is Colonel Hayes, Apex Tactical Command," came a voice over intercepted radio frequencies. "Target resistance is heavier than expected. Authorization requested for artillery support." Elena felt ice form in her stomach as she realized the scope of Apex's desperation. They were requesting permission to use military-grade explosives against American citizens on U.S. soil, abandoning all pretense of legal authority in their determination to silence the last witnesses to their crimes. Negative on artillery came the response from what Elena recognized as General Thornfield's voice. "Too much civilian air traffic in the area. Switch to close air support. Make it look like a training accident." The implications were staggering. Apex was preparing to use military aircraft to eliminate Elena and Marcus, then cover up the action as a routine training exercise gone wrong. The same institutional authority that had protected Thornfield's war crimes for 7 years was now being used to authorize new ones. Marcus intercepted additional communications, revealing the full scope of Apex's response. "They've declared temporary no-fly zone over this entire region," he reported, claiming terrorist threats to justify military intervention. Elena understood the strategy immediately by framing their resistance as terrorism. Apex could justify using overwhelming force while controlling the narrative through their connections in the Pentagon and defense establishment. Elena and Marcus would be remembered as dangerous extremists who died attacking American forces, not as whistleblowers trying to expose war crimes. "Congressional hearing is still proceeding," Elena said, monitoring news feeds on her tablet. "Matthews is presenting evidence. Morrison is demanding investigations. As long as we stay alive, the truth keeps spreading. Then we stay alive," Marcus replied, preparing for the next assault wave. "Whatever it takes." As helicopter rotors thundered in the distance and armored vehicles approached the canyon entrance, Elena felt the familiar calm that preceded life or death combat. She'd spent her entire adult life serving her country, believing in the principles that made America worth defending. Now she was fighting those same principles' greatest enemies, people who'd corrupted military, authority for personal gain, and murdered soldiers to protect their profits. The battle for Elena's life had become a battle for the soul of the American military, and the entire world was watching to see which would survive. In Washington, congressional investigators were demanding answers. Around the globe, international prosecutors were preparing war crimes charges. But in a Montana canyon, 2 former special operations soldiers were making their final stand against forces that had betrayed everything they'd sworn to protect. The end was coming, but Elena Blackwood had never learned how to surrender. And Viper was about to remind the world why some fights were worth dying for. The attack helicopters appeared over the canyon rim like mechanical vultures, their rotors thundering against the rock walls as they took positions for what General Thornfield intended to be the final elimination of Crimson Battalion's last survivors. Elena counted 3 Apache gunships and 2 Blackhawks filled with assault troops. Enough firepower to reduce the entire canyon to rubble. "This is your final warning," boomed a voice through external speakers. "Surrender immediately or face the consequences of resisting federal authority." Elena keyed her radio to the frequency she knew would be monitored by every news organization and government agency tracking the situation. "This is Staff Sergeant Elena Blackwood, United States Army. Serial number 429768532. I am an American soldier being illegally targeted by private military contractors who have committed war crimes and treason. Any action taken against me is a violation of federal law and a constitution I swore to defend." The broadcast went out over emergency frequencies picked up by news networks and transmitted around the world in real time. In the congressional hearing room, Representative Morrison ordered the session to pause as members watched live feeds of American military aircraft preparing to attack 2 soldiers whose only crime had been exposing war crimes. "This is madness," Morrison announced to the cameras. "We're watching American military assets being used to eliminate witnesses to congressional testimony. I'm calling for immediate intervention by federal law enforcement." But General Thornfield had spent years building networks of influence that extended far beyond Apex defense systems. Military commanders who owed their careers to his recommendations. Pentagon officials who benefited from defense contracts he'd facilitated. Politicians whose campaigns had been funded by the military-industrial complex he represented. Target has been classified as an enemy combatant, Thornfield announced through secure military channels. Authorization granted for immediate neutralization under anti-terrorism protocols. In the canyon, Elena and Marcus prepared for an engagement. They couldn't possibly win through conventional tactics. But Crimson Battalion had never relied solely on firepower. They've been trained to think strategically, to find advantages in impossible situations, and to turn enemy strengths into weaknesses. Marcus, Elena said, studying the helicopter formations through her rifle scope. Remember the Kabul extraction when we had to convince hostile forces that attacking us would cost more than letting us go? Marcus smiled grimly, understanding her strategy immediately. Make the cure worse than the disease. But these aren't rational actors. Thornfield's beyond the point of calculating costs and benefits. Not Thornfield, Elena clarified. The helicopter pilot's military personnel following orders they probably don't fully understand. She switched her radio to military aviation frequencies and began broadcasting on channels used for emergency communications between aircraft. Apache lead. This is Viper. I'm a United States Army Staff Sergeant with classified information about war crimes committed by your commanding officers. You are being ordered to fire on American citizens to prevent congressional testimony. The lead helicopter's response came immediately, but with a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. Viper, you are designated as a hostile combatant. Engaged in terrorist activities, surrender immediately. Apache lead, check your briefing materials. Did your commanding officer mention that I'm scheduled to testify before Congress about illegal human experimentation conducted by Apex Defense Systems? Did he explain that the terrorist activities consist of providing evidence of war crimes to congressional investigators? Elena could hear cross-chatter between the helicopters as pilots began questioning their orders. Military aviators were trained to think independently, to question mission parameters that didn't make tactical sense. The more Elena revealed about the true nature of their mission, the more uncomfortable they became with their role. Apache lead, your current mission violates the Posse Comitatus Act, which prohibits military forces from acting as domestic law enforcement. You are being ordered to commit murder to cover up treason. The helicopters maintained their positions, but Elena noticed subtle changes in their formation that suggested internal debate among the crews. She pressed her advantage, broadcasting on frequencies that would be monitored by military command structures far above Thornfield's immediate influence. This is Staff Sergeant Elena Blackwood requesting immediate contact with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I have evidence that General Richard Thornfield has been selling classified intelligence to foreign powers and has ordered the murder of American soldiers to cover his crimes. I am currently under attack by U.S. military assets acting on illegal orders. The response came not from the helicopters, but from a new voice on military command frequencies. Someone with enough authority to override field operations in real time. Apache lead. This is General Patricia Walsh, Joint Chiefs Oversight. You are ordered to stand down immediately and await further instructions. Do not engage targets until this situation has been clarified through proper channels. Elena felt a surge of hope as the helicopter formation began pulling back from attack positions. General Walsh had been one of the few Pentagon officials completely outside Apex's influence network, known for her integrity and her aggressive pursuit of military corruption. But General Thornfield wasn't finished. Elena's radio crackled with his voice, transmitted on the same frequencies where the standoff was being broadcast to the world. General Walsh, you are interfering with a classified anti-terrorism operation. The targets have been confirmed as enemy combatants with connections to foreign intelligence services. Walsh's response was ice-cold and immediately recognizable to Elena as the voice of military authority exercised by someone who'd never been compromised by political considerations. General Thornfield, you are relieved of command pending investigation into allegations of war crimes and treason. All military assets under your operational control are hereby transferred to Joint Chiefs Oversight. Any resistance to this order will be considered mutiny. The canyon fell silent except for the sound of helicopter rotors as crews processed orders that effectively ended Thornfield's career and authority. Elena knew that Walsh's intervention had saved their lives. But she also knew that Thornfield still had private contractors who weren't bound by military command structures. As if summoned by her thoughts, Elena heard the sound of approaching vehicles from the canyon entrance of PEX's private military teams moving to complete the mission that military pilots had been ordered to abandon. Elena, Marcus called out, pointing toward the canyon rim where federal vehicles were appearing. Cavalry's here. Elena looked up to see U.S. Marshals taking positions along the canyon's edge, their presence broadcast on emergency frequencies to ensure everyone knew that federal law enforcement was now protecting the witnesses rather than hunting them. The lead marshal's voice echoed through the canyon with the authority of constitutional law. This is Deputy Marshal Sarah Chun, United States Marshal Service. We are here to provide protection for congressional witnesses Elena Blackwood and Marcus Chun. Any interference with our mission will be considered obstruction of justice. Elena almost laughed at the irony after 7 years of running from federal authority. She was being rescued by it. The same constitutional principles that Thornfield had corrupted were now being used to protect the witnesses who would expose his crimes. As Apex's private contractors retreated in the face of federal law enforcement, Elena and Marcus emerged from their defensive positions to meet their escorts. The battle was over, but Elena knew the war for justice was just beginning. Ready to testify before Congress? Deputy Marshal Chun asked as she led them toward the federal vehicles. Elena looked back at the canyon where she'd made her last stand as a fugitive, then toward the helicopters where military pilots were learning that some orders should never be followed. I've been ready for 7 years, she replied. Time to honor the dead and expose the truth. As the convoy headed toward Washington and the congressional hearing that would bring down Apex defense systems, Elena felt the weight of survival guilt finally beginning to lift. Phoenix, Hawk, and Raptor would have justice at last, and their deaths would mean something more than just another cover-up in an endless war fought in shadows. The restaurant owner from Pinewood Valley was gone forever, but Elena Blackwood had returned to finish the mission that Crimson Battalion had started in a Syrian compound 7 years ago. Truth was about to triumph over power, and the ghosts of the past could finally rest. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.